Why is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu self-defense curriculum so bad? Here you have a perfectly functional, pressure-tested combat sport, one of the core elements of MMA, and its self-defense curriculum is, on average, utter garbage. It's not because you never go to the ground in a street fight, it's not because they don't teach strikes, and it's not even because of the over-reliance on the gi. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu self-defense isn't bad because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is bad. It's bad because it's not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, before I get into the nitty-gritty philosophical ideas of what constitutes an effective martial art, I want to show you how bad these moves actually are. Because it's not just your local McDojos teaching this nonsense, it's some of the biggest names in the industry. These are the McDojos we make fun of, and this is Pedro Sauer's actual curriculum. Are you in a tussle and somebody grabs your shirt? Well, just frame, cross-step, and break their grip while completely exposing your back to them. Or you could just punch them and not go through a 4-step procedure to give them your back. Even if the move works as intended, punching is faster, easier, gets you the initiative, and is just better. What if punching them doesn't make them let go? Good! Then you get to punch them again. By grabbing your shirt, your opponent is giving you a free hit, and you're not taking it? You don't want to break their grip, you want them to keep uselessly holding on. I know you might be concerned about them using the grips to throw you, but that works really well in judo competitions because punches aren't allowed. In order to throw someone in a scenario with live punches, I almost always have to close the distance and get my hips against them. That's really hard to do when their knuckles are saying, "Get off my lawn!" But no one is going to teach you to just punch them because that's too obvious. I have to give you some extra special secret answers, or else why would you spend money on my seminar? And I could almost buy the excuse of maybe we don't want to escalate the fight by hitting them quite yet, except that the grip break ends with an elbow strike. So you're already planning to strike them, but you're taking way longer to do it, and you're exposing your back in the process. And that's assuming that the move actually works, because it didn't go too well when I tried it in a t-shirt. It doesn't break their grip so much as it breaks my shirt. Okay, but what if someone is standing up and trying to front choke you? Should you isolate a finger and break it? Or maybe duck your head and circle away? Why don't these defenses work? Well, the way you can tell that a defense to a front choke is bad is by noticing that it's a defense to the front choke. It's the least effective choke in the world. Learning to defend it is a waste of your time. If I pass out in this choke, it's because I got sleepy from punching their face so many times. First of all, closing off someone's carotid arteries with your thumbs is stunningly difficult. Second of all, there's nothing holding the victim in place or controlling their rotation, which means getting out of the position is pretty easy. Plus, neck muscles are a whole lot stronger than fingers, which means I can usually just tank the choke indefinitely without tapping. Even significant size and strength advantages can fail to make this choke even moderately effective.
Now that's a lot of damage!
You don't even have to escape this choke. You can just stare at them until they feel dumb. But if you want to escape, you can punch them, kick them, assume the fetal position, give them a wet willy, turn around, or my favorite, just leave. If you move your body in a direction, you'll probably get out of this choke. I think the only physical actions that you can take that won't get you out of this choke are the moves that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people want to teach you. Prying their finger back can get their hand off, but it usually requires you to elongate your neck in order to fit your own hand into that space. And stretching out your neck makes it much easier for them to squeeze and results in the choke being far less comfortable. I had this choke done to me dozens of times for this video, and the only time I turned bright red was when I was trying to pry their finger off. In addition, getting a hold of their finger takes a comparatively long time, and being able to break it is largely fantasy. Once you start pulling their finger off, their tensed grip means it immediately starts curling into a fist. In order to stop this, you would have to wrap your hand around their finger to brace it before their finger ever comes off your neck, which is really difficult to do. Even if you successfully isolate the finger, they'll just yank their hand free and regrip before you can attempt to break anything. People don't stand there and go, "Oh, you're prying my finger off. Oh, that kind of hurts. Oh, no." Their finger budges a millimeter and they do that. Plus, I'm trying to break a joint without actually controlling the limb, which is a known mistake in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Attempting to pry their finger off really leads to an endless back and forth hand fighting match, with their other hand still on your throat. Remember that you could have just started punching their lights out. You had infinite free shots on their face and you're hand fighting? Why? Now, assuming you're not pressed against a wall, ducking out of the choke works fine. Unless, of course, your opponent is able to master the secret forbidden technique of pinch your elbows a little. Then the duck stops working entirely because my downward force is no longer transferred into their thumbs. It's transferred through their forearms, into their rib cage, into their lower body, and then into the floor, which isn't going anywhere. I don't know how much weight you can hold in this position, but the answer is probably more than I can generate with my throat. Any force I apply creates an equal and opposite reaction directly into my windpipe. If I do manage to duck out, I'm flinging my head directly at their knees. I made a video on why ducking punches is unlikely to get you kneed in the head, but that's only because of how people shift their weight when they punch. In a front choke, their weight is much more likely to be balanced, and they're already tracking your head movement with their hands. Now, a knee or head kick is a lot more likely, especially since I'm not shooting in or doing a technical bob and weave. I'm yeeting my face straight down and out. Okay, so why can't we just punch the guy?
By punching him, he can always let go and strike me back. So I want to avoid that.
What? Because he might punch back? But you get a free first punch, and he has to let go of the choke to punch you. You have escaped the position while gaining the initiative. What do you think will happen if you successfully duck your head out without being kneed into oblivion? He'll be so impressed with your cool move that he'll apologize and leave? No! He'll start punching you! The only difference is that you've given up the first punch advantage, ceded the initiative, and created enough space for your opponent to gain forward momentum. The front choke is the most easily defended choke in the history of the world, and the defenses they're giving aren't even good. Anyone with combat sports experience already has 1,000 ways out of this position, and none of them are either of these moves. The only reason the front choke is shown so often in self-defense curricula is because it's so awful it makes even the dumbest counters feel somewhat effective. It's the physical manifestation of a straw man argument. No one with a functioning brain would ever use it, but countering it sure makes us feel cool. Now, for the headlock, pulling their head back and standing up straight is basically the defense. Virtually every art teaches it. And it doesn't even work. Not only can they often turn their head away or stretch their face out of reach, but they can also just endure the face pull. You're reaching above your head, turning your wrist to the outside and pulling backwards. You have no leverage. But the dumbest part isn't that this counter can be stopped with nothing but willpower. It's that being in the headlock is the good position.
I get in the headlock and I hold onto it. I've basically given him a handle that he can do whatever he wants. If you don't know shit else, just let go of the headlock.
You have multitudes of ways to put them on the ground. You can run the pipe, lateral drop, forward trip, knee pick, single leg lift, or any number of other things. Think about it this way. What's the most basic way to put someone on the ground and get a dominant position? You go for their legs. When I'm in a headlock, I'm already at their legs. Why would I exert effort to get further away from my ticket to a dominant position? Being put in a headlock is a gift. Why would you reject this beautiful opportunity? The other person can do one of exactly two things. They can either try and punch you and immediately get taken down, or they can scoot their hips away and bulldog choke you. Scooting their hips away is genuinely the only good option that they have, and any way I grab their legs or hips stops them from doing it. The moment I do this, I'm gonna win. The only reason people teach defenses to headlocks is because the average person doesn't have any wrestling skills and doesn't know that they want to be there. Instructors realized that wrestling is really hard and people would prefer to just buy nonsense, so they started selling nonsense instead. You can't go to the ground in a street fight because they might have friends. You're in a headlock. You're already grappling. Do you think that all of your opponent's friends are going to patiently wait for you to get posture and get out of the position? No. If it's 5-on-1, the fight is already over. It's done. But against one person, the headlock is where I want to be. Alright, but what about someone choking you from behind? That's basically a short choke, which is an actual move that exists in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I still have a base and my opponent doesn't even have hooks in, so surely the Gracies can teach me how to defend this.
Alright, all I have to do is turn towards their elbow and tackle my shoulder.
This might be the dumbest one yet. So the reason back escapes are so difficult on the ground is because people put hooks in. The point of the hooks is to keep your opponent's hips facing directly away from yours. In a standing position, you don't even have to deal with the hooks, which means your hips are able to turn freely. This means you're able to step behind your opponent's leg, ruining their choking angle. However, one direction will be much easier to escape in than the other. This is because the act of choking someone automatically offsets your center lines. If they're choking you with their right arm, your left hip will be roughly in the center of their body, and your right hip will be on the outside. Slipping your left hip to their right side is going to be far easier than slipping your right leg to the opposite side. You have to pass half the number of legs, and it's a much shorter distance to travel. And it's the exact same problem when it comes to your shoulders. You'll notice when I'm in a choke, I have an inside shoulder and an outside shoulder. Getting this inside shoulder to the nearest outside is easy peasy lemon squeezy. Getting this outside shoulder to the opposite side might as well be 100 miles away and is difficult, lemon difficult. Plus, you have to consider the problem of head positions. If the choke is getting tight, turning your head towards their choke forces your chin up their arm like a ramp, further exposing your neck. On the ground, this is called a side naked choke, and it's very much a thing. Also, anyone that's familiar with the rear naked choke knows that you want your elbow in line with their chin in order to finish the choke. If you turn towards the choke, what do? You line their elbow up with your own chin. Why? Turning your chin away from the choke puts your throat into an open pocket of space. On the ground, this position is called I'm clinging onto their head like an idiot and I'm about to lose position. Now, if you manage to turn into the choke and do the shoulder slip, you are now chest to chest, hopefully with underhooks. If you manage to turn away from their choke, you now have underhooks and a superior angle. You can now take them for a ride. An additional factor is how you make space to get your shoulder across. If your opponent is puffing their chest, there's no room for you to escape irrespective of which shoulder you're turning. What you have to do is start the turn, bend your body down to get your shoulders closer to their hips, giving you more room to take it through. When turning into the choke, you're putting yourself into a crossface, making it very difficult to bend down. When turning away from the choke, your head is now pushing down either into open space or onto their wrists, giving you a much better leverage position. Now, the shoulder slip might work if the person choking you is in a bladed stance. Then, their torso won't be in the way of your shoulder and their far side leg won't be in the way of your hips. However, this is the wrong way to choke someone because it's so much less secure. And you shouldn't train to stop only unskilled people because you can't guarantee that your attacker will be an idiot. The best escape will work against a skilled or unskilled attacker. But even in this situation, I would argue that turning into the choke is still going to be better than a shoulder slip because your opponent's turn to blade their body is going to wrench your head in that direction anyway. It's going to be a whole lot easier to go with the motion because going against the motion makes you clothesline yourself. You okay? If your opponent is pulling you into a better position, you might as well let them. The bottom line is that turning away from the choking arm is almost always going to be easier. It's easier to get the hip angle, it's easier to get your shoulder out, and it's easier to protect your windpipe. My best guess as to why they don't teach this is that it ends up with you in a headlock. And they wanted to make money teaching you how to get out of a headlock, so they couldn't then turn around and teach you how to get into one. Instead, they made up whatever this is. In a nutshell, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu self-defense moves either don't work or they only work against other moves that don't work. And sometimes, both. And this is not a handful of fringe charlatans giving Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a bad name. When people like Pedro Sauer and the Gracie family are peddling this stuff, it infects every corner of the art. I showed Eli Knight doing unnecessary moves, not because he's bad at self-defense, but because he's one of the best in the industry. I don't think he's stupid or greedy. He just got tricked into repeating some of Pedro Sauer's nonsense because bad self-defense moves are basically contagious. Things that come from Eli Knight's head are usually pretty good. Things he learned from others can be hit or miss. Repeating the moves taught by those that came before you should be a valid way of relaying information. Unfortunately, self-defense curricula often contain more bad moves than good moves, making this approach unworkable. But why is this happening? How did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu go off the rails and how do we fix it? Well, as you might have guessed, it's because of money. The reality is that learning to fight well enough to defend yourself takes time, money, blood, sweat, and tears. People would much rather feel safe than be safe, and supply will always rise to meet that misguided demand. I've actually seen Henner Gracie teach decent, workable self-defense moves that he admits takes lots of live practice and pressure testing in order to actually use.
If you don't practice punch protection distances in your regular grappling jiu-jitsu training, it's an optimistic assumption at best that your jiu-jitsu skills are directly transferable to a street altercation, a real fight.
But that video is aimed at his students, people that already know combat sports and will likely know bullcrap when they see it. And yes, those moves are also in the women's self-defense curriculum, but absent is the live competitive pressure testing that actually teaches you how to use them. And added in are a litany of silly moves that any self-respecting grappler would look at and go, ew. The reason these two programs are so different is because untrained women, the target audience of this course, often don't know what actual fighting is supposed to look like, so they're willing to buy whatever makes them feel safe. And there are some people in the industry willing to sell them whatever sweet-smelling garbage makes them money. They're selling useless moves to people that have no way of knowing any better. I would commit war crimes for a Klondike bar, and even I think that's unethical. And this problem is compounded by the fact that the people selling this stuff have also hitched their wagon to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is less of a problem now, but back in the day, the Gracies were trying to convince people that grappling could work in a fight. As a result, they kind of viewed the concept of striking as their direct competition. Therefore, they rarely admitted that you should use anything besides pure grappling. So when a simple punch is the clear and obvious answer, they have to make up some grappling nonsense. Because admitting that a punch is the best option is an admission that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu isn't the perfect be-all end-all martial art for every situation. And when your livelihood is solely dependent on your ability to sell a grappling art, you're pretty strongly incentivized to argue that grappling rocks. It's the equivalent to a hammer salesman insisting that every problem really is a nail. And lucky for you, I sell just the tool to solve it. What a coincidence! While this direct antagonism between Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and striking arts hasn't really existed in a few decades, some of the self-defense moves circulating the industry haven't been updated in at least that long. Remember, when moves are not tested in competitions, there's virtually zero innovation. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners have just been regurgitating the same untested moves since before mixed martial arts was a thing. And these moves were never meant to be effective. They were meant to perpetuate the idea of grappling supremacy, and specifically to promote Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Remember how I kept saying that in all those self-defense positions you would be better off just using basic punching or basic wrestling? Any old school Gracie admitting that would be guilty of heresy. The moves don't work because they weren't invented to work. They were invented to be propaganda. Okay, but why does it even matter? Aren't these crappy self-defense courses better than nothing? Well, no, not really. Throw punch and grab legs are pretty instinctual things that a lot of people could figure out without any training at all. So when you teach them dramatically less efficient moves, you are, in fact, making them worse. Giving people bad moves is arguably worse than nothing at all. It gives them a false sense of confidence and prevents them from adjusting when their super effective move gets shut down in an actual fight. And no, it's probably not going to get anyone killed. Icy Mike made a pretty good argument about that. But it could make them worse off than if they had never taken the course. And even if it doesn't, they're still not getting the value that was promised to them when they gave up their hard-earned money. They're just convincing people that don't know any better to buy a pitiful product at a premium price. But you know what? I get it. If you admitted that learning to fight involves getting in shape, learning hundreds of interrelated moves, positions, and potential reactions, and then spending an unspecified length of time getting hit in the face until you eventually gain the correct reflexes and mentality, most people wouldn't want to do it. I've also heard people argue that these crappy self-defense courses are really just a marketing gimmick. It's just to get people in the door so you can teach them how to actually fight. You have to lure people in with fancy stuff to teach them what fighting is really like. Okay, even if any of that were true, that's still a pretty underhanded bait and switch. And it's furthering those misconceptions by putting that stuff out there. Second of all, that's clearly not what they're doing. Their final belt tests have the same stupid moves in them. These people are testing for their black belts under Pedro Sauer. The dumb moves they're advertising are the same dumb moves they're teaching. The most infuriating part of this is that those moves aren't even Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. These things do not exist in normal curricula. Half of them aren't even legal in MMA, much less grappling. It's not how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners compete, spar, or even drill. It's a completely separate thing disguising itself as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in order to make more money. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a competition-based art that prioritizes having an extraordinarily deep well of knowledge and accumulating countless hours of live, semi-competitive pressure testing. These are excellent attributes, and they're what make Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu such a useful art. But the self-defense variations have absolutely none of these advantages, effectively making it an entirely different martial art. And this means that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructors are teaching something that they don't actually practice. This isn't what they got their black belt in. They're just using their rank as a gimmick to sell something that's completely unrelated. It's like someone using their PhD in physics to advertise their juice cleanse. That's not the thing they're good at. And then, because those moves are being advertised by big names, they get copied and pasted around the industry. And when you've got this many notable Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners repeating nonsense for this many decades, you really can't trust any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu self-defense advice. Because everyone is drawing their information from the same poisoned well. The real reason that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu self-defense doesn't work is because they tried to make a self-defense version of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Any attempt to do something different or make it work on the street just means the new version hasn't been tested and the instructors haven't ever done it before. If they just stuck to the basic takedowns, sweeps, and submissions that they already knew, everyone would be better off. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does work for self-defense. But what people label as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu self-defense is terrible self-defense, and it's even worse Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah, don't even tighten up, because I have to.
You turned in and you brought my arm down, which tightened it.
You're right. And all I was doing was trying to do the shoulder slip. That's how much this sucks.
It took a lot for me not to laugh when you said lemon difficult.
Learning to defend it is a waste of your time. Is that okay, Miss Picky? Learning to defend it is a waste of your time. Like, what do you want out of this line? And then we'll do one where I step into that bladed stance and you go the other way.
Okay.
Which will almost definitely result in you falling down.
Okay.
I just realized. Are you okay? It was so effective. Oh my gosh.
We are still recording. I hope you.
I hope so. You don't want to miss this.